Good afternoon. My name is Gabrielle Beerley, and today I will be presenting our Unit 6 lecture information. During this unit, we have discussed the process of memory and how certain things, such as age and disease, can affect memory. Also, during this unit, we have discussed the process of communication and how our brain processes information and how we can communicate with others. According to the textbook, psychologists group memory in 3 different ways. They group it using 1. Sensory memory, 2. Short-term memory, and then 3. Long-term memory. Sensory memory is where all new information is gathered, stored, and processed, all within the span of just a couple of seconds. One way to think about sensory memory is it can be described as a gateway for information before it is moved into short-term or long-term memory, based on what the information holds. During this stage, a person may need repetition if they are in deep thought. If you say something to a person and they are doing an immediate task, they might respond with, "What?" And this could be a sign of sensory memory in effect. Psychologists have also said that this could be described as like an echo effect, where you think you hear something but you may need clarity about it. From there, information can be processed into short-term memory. Short-term memory is where important or meaningful information is passed onto and stored for future use. This stage of memory usually contains information that was stored anywhere from just a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes. The shortest amount of short-term memory can be something as simple as a PIN number for a card. The longest amount of storage in short-term memory can be something like remembering a telephone number or a social security number. People have used methods such as chunking to divide the information and make it easier to remember. Through a process known as consolidation, memories can be transported from short-term into long-term memory. The third stage of memory is long-term memory, and this is where information can be stored anywhere from a couple of minutes up to a couple of decades. An example of long-term memory could be remembering the address of the very first house you lived in and exactly how to get there, a big championship game that you won when you were little, or your own graduation. When a memory continually gets recalled, it makes it harder for the memory to be erased because you continuously recall the information. I believe that memory is a subcortical process because it deals with several different functions inside the brain, including the pituitary gland, the frontal cortex, and the basal ganglia. All of these processes play a role in memory, hormones, hormone production, emotions, and pleasure, which are all things that the mind regulates and controls. Long-term memory also has a lot to do with the abilities of the hippocampal formations deep inside the brain. According to the textbook on page 433, the primary input to the hippocampal formation comes from the entorhinal cortex. The axons of the neurons in the entorhinal cortex, I don't know how to pronounce this, through the prefrontal path and form synapses with the granule cells of the dentate gyrus. The hippocampal functions are located inside the frontal lobe, which is where our sight is. Communication is one of the most important things that we as humans do, and many problems can be solved through communicating with others. There are also many different forms of communication, including talking, writing notes, sending texts, sign language, and even our own physical body language can help communicate things with others. Learning language and being able to communicate with others have several different steps that go into the process. First, a person must be able to understand what another person is saying. So they must speak the same language, or at least be able to understand what the other person is saying. Second, a person must be able to have something to communicate about. When we talk about something that is happening currently, we are using our senses, like hearing, tasting, smelling, sight, and touch. When we talk about things that are happening in the past, we are recalling memories, which is something that our mind is in charge of doing. Both present and past thoughts use the cerebral hemisphere of the brain, and it can also use the prefrontal cortex as well. When it comes to processing language, we have two main ways to do it. That's auditory and visual ways. Auditory is where we listen to information and we are able to process it, and visionary is where we look at something and can understand what it means. Deep in our minds, we have a sort of dictionary, so to say, and that holds all the different words we have learned over our lives. When we see or hear a word, it can alert our minds to what the word means and the context that it's being used in. If a person is bilingual, then the mind must work twice as hard to understand and process the information, because not only do you have to process the information, but you might have to translate it from one language to another. And these are all functions of what the mind does. Communication is mediated on a neurological level because the mind holds all the information and it is essentially the motor to our body. Without the mind, it would be impossible for us to move, speak, feel, or live. I hope you enjoyed my speech, and thank you for listening.